Of all of the ways available to settle an argument, dueling might seem like the most foolish. That's because it was. Intentionally shooting or swording each other over disagreements, sometimes extremely petty disagreements, was, to put it mildly, a bad use of one's time. But regardless, they were, for quite a while, a real sensation. Allow me to explain. Despite how dueling was generally against the law, the practice had its own strict set of guidelines, like a fight club but with more shirts and guns. There were many variations on the basic rules of the duel, but the classic European duel model is this. A gentleman gets offended, and in order to defend his honor, he throws a little hissy fit, sometimes in the form of throwing his glove on the floor, colloquially called throwing down the gauntlet. The second gentleman, the offender, then had the option of issuing a public apology or else risk his own life to try and beat the ever-loving crap out of the first gentleman. At first glance, this seems like trying to decide between jumping off of a chair or jumping out of a window. The better choice seems pretty obvious, but there were other factors to consider as to why someone might choose to duel. The first is, of course, rage, which is the second least rational of all emotions. In the heat of the moment, you might issue or accept a duel, and then later regret doing so. In fact, this was common, and the code of the duel usually allowed for reconciliation to happen without a fight occurring. But if they refused to back down, the fight was on. And this was because of the second factor, honor. Losing your honor was social death in the era of dueling. If someone was marked as a coward by refusing to duel, they would be mocked and ridiculed on every social media network of the time. Like town criers and carrier pigeons, I guess. But even those who chose to duel often paid a social price. This is explained by historian John Norris. If they elected not to take up pistols, they would seem cowardly and lose face in public opinion. However, if they took up pistols to defend themselves and their honor, they were equally vilified for being reckless. It was a lose-lose situation, with perhaps the slightly more honorable option being to fight and win. Traditionally, the issuer of the challenge got to choose where to fight, while the recipient chose the weapons. The place of the duel was called the Field of Honor, and both parties showed up there at an agreed-upon time. Usually, the Field of Honor was in some hidden area where the participants wouldn't be bothered by rational passerby or authorities. The weapons were usually identical to ensure fairness. Most duels used swords, and later, guns. But other weapons were proposed and used too, including hurling billiard balls at each other, slapping each other with clapboards, and horses that were specially trained to kick. Sometimes the weapons to be used were kept secret from the challenger until the day of the duel. Each duelist brought with them one or more trusted witnesses, called a second. The second was responsible for checking the weapons, and trying to talk these idiots out of it one more time. Although, sometimes the seconds got involved in the fight as well, depending on how bloodthirsty everyone happened to be on that particular day. The fight continued until a previously agreed upon condition, whether it was first blood, until someone was unable to continue fighting, or death. There was often a doctor present to try and stop the dying, which was of course ironic on the occasions when the duelists were attempting to kill each other. And make no mistake, dueling was heavily frowned upon. Not only was it against the law in many places, but in 1563, the Catholic Church decreed that the custom was detestable and ordered the excommunication of anyone involved, including seconds and witnesses and anyone who publicly supported the practice. Not only that, any duelist who died was to be denied a proper Christian burial. This did not stop the duel. European-style duels were common in Italy, Germany, Russia, England, and Ireland, and were very popular in France. Within one 18-year period, more than 4,000 French gentlemen lost their lives. In the United States, dueling became especially popular in the 19th century, when even prominent politicians such as Alexander Hamilton were fighting and dying in duels. With so many duels fought across history, it's difficult to choose the most sensational. But let's talk about a few of them that stand out as especially off-kilter. A particularly unusual duel occurred in the skies of France in 1808, when two Frenchmen, Monsieur Grandpré and Monsieur Lepic, decided to duel with guns while flying in identical hot air balloons. A large crowd gathered to watch as the balloons rose into the sky. Somewhere around half a mile in the air, a signal was given, and Lepic fired, and astoundingly missed his opponent's balloon completely. Grand Prix then fired back accurately and deflated the opposing balloon. Both Le Pic and his second were killed upon impact with the ground. In 1792, a woman named Mrs. Elphinstone paid a social visit to the estate of Lady Almeria Braddock. The visit was uneventful until Elphinstone carelessly complimented Almeria on her looks. Elphinstone said to Almeria, "40 years ago, I am told, a young fellow could hardly gaze upon you with impunity." Almeria, offended by the implication, stated that she was not yet even 30 years old. Elphinstone retorted, probably correctly, that Lady Almeria was born in 1732, making her 61. Both agreed to settle the matter with a duel. At 10 paces, they each fired one shot. Almeria missed while Elphinstone shot her opponent directly in the hat. Unsatisfied, they switched to swords, and after a while, Elphinstone was lightly wounded in the arm. They called off the duel at that point, agreeing that honor had been restored. This event is known as the petticoat duel, as it was somewhat unusual for women to engage in such fights. And let's not forget the most Canadian duel in history. In 1836, two Canadian politicians, both called Charles, were about to open fire on each other, when their seconds came up with a brilliant alternative. The Charleses were instructed to walk to the center of the field of honor and clasp hands. Then, on a signal, they simultaneously apologized and then accepted each other's apologies. Nobody was hurt, except perhaps anyone fighting against Canadian stereotypes. Dueling eventually lost popularity. Author V.G. Kiernan writes that eventually public opinion outside it grew robust enough to brand dueling as either wicked or ridiculous. This came about with surprising slowness. Today, dueling is thankfully extinct, allowing us to deal with our disagreements in more mature ways, such as through leaving passive-aggressive voicemails or mailing glitter to each other.